The night was cold and quiet as Danny Carter pushed his mop bucket down the long hallway of the Galactic Embassy complex in Houston, Texas, where he had worked for 6 years as a janitor on the night shift. A job that most people would find boring, but one that Danny had learned to appreciate for its simplicity and its steady paycheck that helped him raise his daughter, alone after his wife had passed away from cancer when little Mia was only 6 years. Old Danny was 42 years old now, a man with tired eyes and rough hands and a heart that had been broken and put back together more times than he could count. But he kept moving forward because that was what fathers did. And he had promised his wife on her deathbed that he would always take care of their little girl, no matter what happened. The embassy had opened 3 years ago, when the Collective, a federation of 12 different alien species from across the galaxy, had made first contact with Earth and established diplomatic relations with humanity. And Danny had seen plenty of strange and wonderful things while mopping these floors late at night when most of the diplomats and officials had gone home. He had seen tall gray beings with 4 arms, discussing trade agreements in whispered voices. And he had seen small furry creatures that looked like teddy bears but spoke 17 languages. And he had seen reptilian warriors with scales like armor who nodded politely at him as he cleaned around their meetings. But Danny never got involved in any of it because he was just a janitor, and his job was to clean and go home and be there for Mia when she woke up for school. But everything changed on a cold Tuesday night in February when Danny was cleaning the 3rd floor near the recycling units where nobody ever went because it was just storage and old equipment and forgotten boxes of supplies that had been sitting there since the embassy first opened. He heard a small sound, like a whimper or a cry, coming from behind one of the large recycling containers. And Danny stopped pushing his mop and listened carefully, because he thought maybe a rat had gotten into the building, or maybe one of the small cleaning robots had gotten stuck again. But when he walked around the container and looked into the dark corner, he saw something that made his heart stop for just a moment. There was a creature curled into a ball, no bigger than a house cat, with pale lavender scales that looked almost gray in the dim light, and small wings tucked tight against a trembling body. And Danny recognized the species immediately because he had cleaned the Valorian ambassador's office many times and knew what their kind looked like. Valorians were one of the 12 species in the Collective, dragon-like beings who came from a planet near the outer rim of the galaxy. And they were known for their pride and their strict social rules and their beautiful wings that allowed them to soar through the skies of their homeworld. But this one was just a child. Danny could tell, maybe the equivalent of 8 or 9 years old in human terms. And she was shaking with fear, and her golden eyes were wide and wet as she stared up at him like she expected him to hurt her or call the guards or do something terrible. Danny crouched down slowly, keeping his movements gentle and calm the way he did when Mia had nightmares and needed comfort in the middle of the night. And he spoke in a soft voice that he hoped would not scare her. "Hey there, little one, are you lost?" The little dragon did not answer, just kept staring at him with those big golden eyes that reflected the dim light like pools of honey. Danny glanced at the pizza box he had brought for his midnight meal, still warm from the cafeteria where he had heated it up an hour ago. And he thought that maybe the child was hungry because she looked so thin and weak and scared. He opened the box and held out a slice toward her, the cheese still gooey and the pepperoni glistening with grease the way good pizza should look. And he smiled warmly. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" The little dragon's voice came out as barely a whisper, so quiet that Danny had to lean closer to hear her words. "Sir, I cannot eat. Human food is poison to Valorians. We can only consume synthesized Nutri-Gel, or we will become very sick." Danny looked at the pizza in his hand, and then back at the trembling child, and felt a wave of sadness wash over him because he could not even offer her something as simple as food to comfort her. "Well, that is a real shame because this is pretty good pizza," he said with a gentle smile. And then he surprised himself by sitting down cross-legged on the floor he had just mopped, right there in the dim corner next to the recycling container, his old knees protesting as he lowered himself down. "Do you mind if I sit with you anyway?" The little dragon stared at him like he had grown a second head or sprouted wings of his own, her golden eyes blinking in confusion at this strange human who was not calling security or trying to grab her or doing any of the things she had expected. "You want to sit with me?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Sure, why not? I was going to take my break anyway, and this seems like as good a spot as any," Danny said as he took a bite of his pizza and chewed slowly. Keeping his body language relaxed and non-threatening, he sat in silence for a few minutes, Danny eating his pizza and the little dragon watching him with cautious curiosity, her trembling slowly beginning to stop as she realized that this human was not going to hurt her. "My name is Danny," he said between bites. "Danny Carter. I clean this building at night. Been doing it for about 6 years now. What is your name?" The little dragon hesitated for a long moment, her small claws clicking against the tile floor as she shifted nervously. "I am called Kira," she finally said. "Well, Kira, that is a very pretty name," Danny said with a warm smile. "It is nice to meet you." Even if the circumstances are a bit unusual, Kira tilted her head to the side, studying him with an expression that seemed far too old and tired for such a young face. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "You do not know me. You do not know what I am. Why would you sit here with me instead of calling the guards?" Danny finished his slice of pizza and wiped his hands on his work pants before answering. "Because you look scared and alone and cold. And I have a daughter about your age. Well, about your age in human years, I think. And if she was ever scared and alone somewhere, I would want someone to be kind to her." Kira's eyes widened at his words, and something shifted in her expression. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. "Your daughter is fortunate to have a father like you. She," whispered Danny, felt his heart ache at the pain hidden in those simple words. "Do you want to tell me what you are doing back here all alone, Kira?" he asked gently. "Maybe I can help." And so Kira began to tell him her story. And Danny listened with growing horror and anger as he learned the truth about this little dragon girl who had been abandoned by her own people in a cold corner of an alien embassy on a planet far from her home. Kira spoke slowly at first, her voice barely above a whisper as she told Danny the story of her life on Valoria, a planet of towering mountains and endless skies where the ability to fly was not just a skill, but the very foundation of their entire society and culture. She explained that on Valoria, every child was born with wings, and by the age of 5 in human years, those wings would grow large enough and strong enough for flight. And the young Valorians would take to the skies with their parents and learn the ways of their people among the clouds, but Kira's wings had never grown properly, she said, holding out her small lavender appendages that were barely bigger than her hands, twisted and stunted and clearly incapable of ever lifting her into the air no matter how hard she might try or how much she might wish. "On my world, those who cannot fly are considered defective," Kira explained, her golden eyes fixed on the floor as shame colored her voice. "We are seen as burdens, as mistakes, as beings without value or purpose in Valorian society." Danny felt his hands curl into fists at his sides as he listened, anger building in his chest at the cruelty of such a system. "What happens to children like you on Valoria?" he asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. "We are sent to labor camps in the deep valleys where the flightless ones work until they die," Kira said quietly. "We are given the most dangerous jobs, the hardest tasks. And we are treated as less than animals because we cannot soar through the sky like proper Valorians. She paused and took a shaky breath before continuing. My parents were ashamed of me from the moment they realized my wings would never grow. But my father was a diplomat, and it would have looked bad for him to have a defective daughter sent to the camps. So they kept me hidden for years, locked in our home where no one could see me. Danny's heart broke for this little girl who had spent her childhood hidden away like a shameful secret, never allowed to play or make friends or experience any of the joys that children deserved. When my father was assigned to the Earth Embassy, they brought me along, Kira continued, but not because they wanted me. They brought me because they planned to leave me here, to abandon me on this alien planet where no one would know who I was or where I came from. They were going to dump you here like garbage? Danny asked, his voice rough with barely contained fury. Kira nodded slowly, her small body trembling again. They told me that I should be grateful, that being abandoned on Earth was a mercy compared to the labor camps, that at least here I might survive for a while before I starved or froze or was captured by humans who would experiment on me. She looked up at Danny with those big golden eyes full of tears that Valorians were not supposed to be able to cry. They left 2 days ago. My parents, they were reassigned to a station near Jupiter, and they left without me. Without saying goodbye, without even leaving me any Nutri-Gel to eat. Danny sat in stunned silence for a long moment, trying to process the depths of cruelty that Kira's parents had shown to their own child. And he thought of his own daughter, Mia, sleeping peacefully at home. And he could not imagine ever abandoning her for any reason. That is not right, he said finally, his voice firm and steady. What they did to you is wrong, Kira. It is cruel and evil, and no child should ever be treated that way. It is our way. Kira replied with a defeated shrug of her small shoulders. Well, it is a lousy way, Danny said, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. And I do not care if it is your culture or your tradition or whatever they want to call it. Throwing away children because they are different is wrong no matter what planet you come from. Kira stared at him with an expression of wonder and confusion, as if she had never heard anyone speak against the ways of her people before. You really believe that? She asked softly. With all my heart, Danny replied. He looked at his watch and saw that his shift would end in 4 hours. And then he would go home to his small apartment where Mia would be waking up soon to get ready for school. And he would have to figure out what to do about this little dragon girl who had nowhere else to go. Kira, do you have anywhere to stay? He asked, already knowing the answer. Any friends or family here on Earth who might take you in? Kira shook her head. I have no one. I do not even know how to get food. The Nutri-Gel that Valorians need is expensive and only available through official channels. And I have no money and no way to obtain any. Danny ran his hand through his graying hair and let out a long sigh as he considered his options. Was a single father barely making ends meet, living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with a daughter who asked too many questions. And he had absolutely no idea what Valorians needed to survive, beyond the Nutri-Gel that Kira had mentioned taking. In an alien child would be complicated and expensive, and probably illegal in about 17 different ways. But as he looked at Kira's scared and hopeful face, he knew that he could not just leave her here to starve or be captured by officials who would send her back to a planet that treated her like trash. All right, he said, pushing himself up from the floor with a groan. You are coming home with me. We will figure out the rest later. Kira's eyes went wide with shock. You would take me with you? She asked in disbelief. A stranger, a Valorian, a defective alien that even her own parents did not want? Danny bent down and offered her his hand, calloused and rough from years of hard work. Kid, I am a janitor who talks to his mop when the nights get too long and too quiet, he said with a gentle smile. I am in no position to judge anybody, and besides, My daughter has been asking for a pet, so maybe this will work out for everyone. Kira tilted her head in confusion. I am not a pet, she said seriously. Danny laughed. A warm sound that echoed in the empty hallway. I know. Sweetheart, I was just making a joke. A bad one, apparently. But you will learn that humans use humor to deal with difficult situations. He wiggled his fingers encouragingly. Come on. Take my hand. Let me help you up, and we will get out of this cold corner. Kira hesitated for just a moment, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of deception or cruelty, but finding only kindness and warmth. And then she reached out with her small clawed hand and placed it in his. And Danny gently helped her to her feet. And in that moment, something changed for both of them. Neither of them knew it yet. But that simple act of reaching out and taking his hand would set in motion events that would change not just their lives, but the relationship between humans and the Galactic Collective forever. But for now, Danny just led Kira down the hallway toward the employee exit, pushing his mop bucket with one hand and holding onto his new charge with the other, wondering how he was going to explain to his daughter that he had brought home an alien dragon instead of the puppy she had been asking for. The first few weeks after Kira came to live with Danny and Mia were filled with chaos and confusion and moments of panic that made Danny wonder if he had made a terrible mistake by bringing home an alien child. He knew nothing about. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a tiny kitchen and a living room that also served as a dining room. And adding a third person to the space made everything feel cramped and crowded in ways that took some getting used to. But the biggest challenge was figuring out how to keep Kira alive and healthy when human supplies and food were useless for her. Valorian body. Danny learned quickly that Valorians needed specific conditions to survive on Earth, including a heated sleeping area that stayed at a constant temperature because their cold-blooded bodies could not regulate heat the way humans could, and UV light supplements to replace the radiation from their home star that their scales needed to stay healthy. And most importantly, the Nutri-Gel that was the only thing Kira could safely eat. The Nutri-Gel was the biggest problem because it cost more than Danny made in an entire week. And even if he could afford it, the substance was only available through official collective channels that required identification and documentation that Kira did not have. Danny spent sleepless nights worrying about how he would keep this little girl fed, counting the days until the small supply of Nutri-Gel he had managed to buy from a sympathetic embassy worker ran out. But then Mia stepped up in a way that made Danny's heart swell with pride. His 12-year-old daughter had always been smart and curious, the kind of kid who spent her free time reading science books and watching documentaries about space and dreaming of the day when she could travel to other planets and meet alien species. When Danny brought Kira home and explained the situation, Mia did not ask questions about whether they could afford it or whether it was legal or any of the practical concerns that kept Danny awake at night. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Okay, Dad, we need to figure out how to help her. Let me do some research." And research she did. Mia spent hours on her computer reading everything she could find about Valorian biology, which was not much since the collective kept most of their medical information private. But she pieced together enough clues from scientific papers and embassy press releases to understand the basics. She learned that Valorians needed heat. So she went to the hardware store with her allowance money and bought supplies to build a makeshift heating pad for Kira's bed, carefully constructing it from spare parts and old wires until it maintained a steady warm temperature throughout the night. She learned that UV light was essential. So she convinced her science teacher at school, a kind woman named Mrs. Lopez, who asked very few questions about why a 12-year-old suddenly needed to know about alien biology, to help her obtain a special UV lamp that Kira could sit under for a few hours each day. And most importantly, she figured out a solution to the Nutri-Gel problem. Mia discovered that the basic components of Nutri-Gel were actually quite simple. Just a specific combination of proteins and minerals and nutrients that Valorian bodies could process. And she realized that with the right equipment, she might be able to synthesize a basic version in her school's science lab. It took her 3 weeks of experiments and failures and starting over from scratch. But eventually, Mia produced a thick purple substance that she nervously offered to Kira for testing. "It probably tastes terrible," Mia warned. "And I am not completely sure it will work, but the chemical composition matches what I found in the research papers." Kira sniffed the substance cautiously, her golden eyes uncertain, and then she took a small taste. Her eyes went wide and her tail, which Danny had learned wagged when she was happy just like a dog's, began to swish back and forth. "This is amazing," Kira said in wonder. "It tastes just like the Nutri-Gel from home. Maybe even better." Mia's face lit up with joy, and she hugged Kira tightly. And from that moment on, the two of them were inseparable. Sisters in everything but blood as the weeks turned into months. The little apartment that had once felt cramped began to feel like a home, filled with laughter and noise and the kind of warmth that had been missing since Danny's wife had passed away. Kira learned English quickly, picking up words and phrases from Mia, who appointed herself as the official teacher and took the job very seriously, creating flashcards and quizzes and rewarding correct answers with small treats that Mia made from the homemade Nutri-Gel recipe. She learned human customs too, like how to use a fork and knife even though she did not need them, and how to say please and thank you, and how bedtime stories worked, which fascinated her because Valorians did not have such traditions. Every night Danny would sit on the edge of Kira's heated bed and read to both girls from a book of fairy tales, stories about princesses and dragons and happy endings. And Kira would listen with her golden eyes wide and her small wings fluttering with excitement at each new adventure on Valoria. "We do not have stories like this," she said one night after Danny finished reading about a brave knight who befriended a dragon instead of fighting it. "Our stories are about duty and honor and the glory of flight. They are not about friendship or love. Well, humans have lots of different kinds of stories," Danny said, tucking the blanket around her small body. "But the best ones are always about people caring for each other. At least in my opinion." Kira was quiet for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "I think I like human stories better," she said softly. Danny smiled and kissed her forehead, something that had felt strange at first but now felt as natural as breathing. "Good night, sweetheart. Sleep well." Of course, they could not hide Kira forever. The embassy had noticed her disappearance, and investigators came to the complex asking questions about the missing Valorian child. And Danny had to play dumb and pretend he knew nothing while his heart pounded in his chest with fear. He filed paperwork for temporary alien guardianship, a legal process so buried in bureaucracy and red tape that it would take months or even years to sort out. And he hoped that by the time anyone figured out what was happening, Kira would be protected by human law. In the meantime, Kira stayed hidden, learning and growing and slowly discovering that not all families were built on blood and not all love had to be earned through being perfect. She still could not eat pizza, her Valorian body rejecting human food the same way it always had. But every Friday night she sat at the kitchen table with Danny and Mia while they ate their weekly pizza dinner, sipping her Nutri-Gel from a mug that said, "World's okayest dad," because Mia had thought it was hilarious. "This is strange," Kira said one Friday evening, watching Danny and Mia chew their pepperoni slices with obvious enjoyment. "What is strange?" Danny asked. "On Valoria, meals are solitary. We eat alone in our chambers. Eating together is considered primitive and beneath our dignity." Mia snorted and nearly choked on her pizza. "Then Valorians are seriously missing out," she said after swallowing. "Eating together is literally the best part of food. It is not just about nutrition. It is about family, Kira considered this for a long moment, her golden eyes moving between Danny and Mia, taking in the warmth and love that filled the small kitchen. "Perhaps humans understand something that my people do not," she said quietly. Danny reached over and squeezed her small clawed hand. "Maybe, sweetheart, or maybe your people just forgot what matters somewhere along the way." Kira nodded slowly, and for the first time since she had been abandoned in that cold corner of the embassy, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. 6 months had passed since Danny brought Kira home from the embassy. 6 months of hiding and hoping and building a life together that felt more real and more precious with each passing day. But Danny had always known deep down that their peaceful existence could not last forever. The knock on the door came on a Sunday afternoon in August, when the summer heat had turned the small apartment into an oven, and all three of them were sitting around the kitchen table, playing a card game that Mia had taught. Danny's heart froze when he opened the door and saw 2 Valorian officials standing in the hallway, their tall bodies covered in scales of deep blue and green, their wings folded behind them like capes of living leather, their golden eyes cold and hard as they looked down at the human janitor who had dared to take one of their kind. Behind them stood a human man in a gray suit, his face uncomfortable and apologetic, and he introduced himself as Greg Patterson, a liaison officer from the Galactic Collective's Earth Relations Department. "Mr. Carter," one of the Valorian officials said, his voice like ice scraping across stone, "we are here regarding the unauthorized custody of Valorian citizen designation Kira. You will return her to us immediately." Danny stood in his doorway with his arms crossed over his chest, his body blocking the entrance to his home, and behind him he could hear Mia moving to stand with Kira, the 2 girls holding hands as they had learned to do whenever they were scared. "She is not going anywhere," Danny said, his voice steady despite the fear pounding in his heart. The second Valorian official stepped forward, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You do not seem to understand your position. Human, this child is property of the Valorian state. She was declared defective at birth and is scheduled for a labor reassignment. By keeping her, you have committed an act of interspecies abduction, which carries severe penalties under collective law." "She is not property," Danny replied, his jaw tight with anger. "She is a kid. She is defective," the first official said coldly, as if explaining something obvious to a particularly stupid child. "Her wings will never develop properly. She cannot fly. She has no value to Valorian society. She has value to me." The words came out of Danny's mouth without thought, simple and honest and filled with more conviction than anything he had ever said in his life. Greg Patterson, the human liaison, shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I understand your position. I really do. And personally, I think what you have done is admirable. But there are treaties involved here, diplomatic agreements between Earth and the Collective that have been in place since first contact. If you do not comply with this request, you could face criminal charges. You could lose your job. You could even face imprisonment." Danny did not blink, then charge me. The standoff lasted for hours that first day, with the Valorian officials making threats and demands while Danny stood his ground and refused to move. And eventually, they left with promises that they would return with proper legal authority to take Kira by force if necessary. That night, Danny sat with Mia and Kira and explained what was happening, not hiding anything from them because he believed they deserved to know the truth no matter how scary it was. "They want to take me back," Kira said quietly, her small body trembling. "They want to send me to the labor camps." "That is not going to happen," Danny said firmly, taking her clawed hands in his own. "I promise you, Kira, I will not let them take you. We will fight this." "But how?" Mia asked, her voice thick with tears. "They are aliens. They have treaties and laws, and we are just a janitor and 2 kids. How can we fight them? Danny did not have an answer to that question, but he knew he had to try the next morning. A neighbor who had seen the Valorian officials in the hallway asked Danny what was going on, and Danny told her the truth. The whole truth about Kira and her parents and the labor camps and everything. The neighbor was horrified. And she told her sister, who told her coworker, who posted about it on social media, and within 24 hours, the story had spread across the entire internet. Local janitor fights alien government to protect. Abandoned dragon girl, the headlines read. And suddenly, Danny Carter, a man who had spent his whole life trying to stay invisible and avoid trouble, found himself at the center of an international incident. People from around the world began reaching out, offering support and encouragement and help in any form they could provide. Lawyers volunteered to take the case for free. Immigration experts offered their knowledge of interspecies law. Politicians made statements condemning the Valorian treatment of their disabled citizens. And ordinary people sent money and supplies and messages of hope. The Valorian officials returned on the third day, this time with a larger entourage and official documents demanding Kira's immediate surrender. But when they arrived at Danny's apartment building, they found something they had not expected. Hundreds of humans gathered outside, forming a wall of bodies between the building and the street, holding signs that said, "Protect Kira," and "Children are not property," and "Humanity stands together." The officials tried to push through, but the crowd would not move. And when the media cameras began rolling and broadcasting the confrontation live to billions of viewers around the world, the Valorians realized they had made a serious mistake on the fourth day. Something remarkable happened. The Galactic Collective, the federation of 12 alien species that had ruled this corner of the galaxy for thousands of years, issued an official statement, something they had never done before in response to what they considered a minor internal matter. The statement acknowledged that Valorian cultural practices regarding disabled citizens had been brought to the attention of the other collective members, and that after careful consideration, the collective council had determined that such practices were incompatible with the values of cooperation and mutual respect that the Federation was founded upon. The Valorian officials, who had demanded Kira's return, were recalled to their homeworld immediately, and Kira was granted official refugee status on Earth, with Danny Carter named as her legal guardian under both human and collective law. When Danny read the news on his phone, surrounded by Mia and Kira and the crowd of supporters who had kept vigil outside their building for 3 days, he felt tears streaming down his face for the first time since his wife's funeral. Kira pressed her forehead against his chest, a Valorian gesture of deep affection and gratitude that she had never shown anyone before. "Thank you," she whispered, her small voice muffled against his shirt. "Thank you for fighting for me." Danny wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. This little dragon girl who had come into his life by chance and changed everything. "You are family now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. And that is what family does around them. The crowd cheered and clapped and wiped tears from their own eyes, because this was not just a victory for Danny or Kira or Mia. This was a victory for everyone who believed that compassion was stronger than cruelty, and that love could overcome even the coldest traditions. The Valorian government would eventually begin reforming their treatment of disabled citizens. Slowly at first, but with growing momentum as more and more of their people saw what humanity had done and began to question the old ways, but that was all in the future for now. Danny just held his daughters, both of them, and felt for the first time in years that everything was going to be okay. 2 years had passed since the day Danny Carter stood in his doorway and refused to let the Valorian officials take his daughter. 2 years of changes, both big and small, that had transformed their little family in ways none of them could have predicted. Danny still worked at the Galactic Embassy complex, Though his job title had changed from janitor to facility supervisor, a promotion that came with better pay and better hours and a small office of his own where he could hang pictures of his daughters on the wall, he no longer worked the night shift, which meant he could be home every evening for dinner and homework and all the ordinary moments of family life that he had missed during those long years of mopping floors in empty hallways. Mia was 14 now, tall and confident and burning with a passion for science that seemed to grow stronger every day. And she had decided that she wanted to become a xenobiologist when she grew up so she could study alien species and help bridge the gap between humanity and the stars. Her homemade Nutri-Gel formula had been picked up by a major food company and was now being produced commercially, providing nutrition for Valorians and other species who had previously struggled to find safe food on Earth. And the royalties from the patent had paid for a college fund that would let Mia attend any university she wanted. And Kira had changed most of all. Her scales had deepened from pale lavender to a rich, vibrant violet, the color of a healthy young Valorian entering adolescence. And though her wings had never grown large enough for flight, just as everyone had predicted, she had learned to use them in other ways that surprised and delighted everyone who met her. She could glide short distances if she jumped from high places, and she had developed a technique for using her wings to change direction quickly while running, making her faster and more agile than anyone else in her gym class. She had also started school, becoming the first Valorian to attend a human public school. And though the first few months had been difficult with stares and whispers and the occasional cruel comment, she had made friends and earned respect through her kindness and her determination to succeed. Her best friend was a human boy named Charlie, who sat next to her in math class and thought her scales were the coolest thing he had ever seen. And the two of them spent their weekends building model rockets and dreaming about the day when they might travel to other planets together. Danny watched his daughters grow and thrive and become the people they were meant to be. And every day he felt grateful for that cold Tuesday night when he had found a scared little dragon hiding behind a recycling container. It was a Friday evening in October when everything came full circle. Danny came home from work carrying a pizza box, which was not unusual since Friday had always been pizza night in the Carter household. But tonight he had a strange smile on his face that made both girls look up from their homework with curiosity. "Dad, what is going on?" Mia asked suspiciously. "You look like you were up to something." Danny set the pizza box on the kitchen table and turned to Kira with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have something for you," he said. "Something that some very smart people at the embassy have been working on for a very long time." He opened the pizza box, and Kira gasped. Inside was a pizza, but not like any pizza she had ever seen before. The crust was a deep purple color, made from something that looked like bread, but clearly was not. And the toppings were strange and unfamiliar, glistening with colors that had no name in English and arranged in a pattern that reminded Kira of the night sky above her homeworld. "What is this?" she asked in a whisper, her golden eyes wide with wonder. A team of scientists at the embassy figured out how to make a Valorian-safe pizza, Danny explained, his voice thick with emotion. "They based it on your Nutri-Gel formula, but found a way to replicate the taste and texture of real pizza. It took them months to get the recipe right, and they made this one special just for you." Kira stared at the pizza, then at Danny, then back at the pizza again. "I can eat this?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Only one way to find out," Mia said with a grin. Bouncing on her heels with excitement, Kira reached out with trembling claws and picked up a slice, the cheese stretching in that satisfying way that she had watched Danny and Mia enjoy so many times over the past 2 years. And she brought it to her mouth with a mixture of hope and fear. She took a small bite, her eyes closed, her tail went rigid. Then her whole body seemed to relax as the flavors washed over her tongue. savory and rich and warm in a way that Nutri-Gel had never been. And for the first time in her life, Kira understood why humans loved food so much. "This is wonderful," she breathed, opening her eyes to find tears streaming down her cheeks. Tears that Valorians were not supposed to be able to cry, but that seemed to come naturally to this one who had learned so much from her human family. "This is the most wonderful thing I have ever tasted." Mia cheered and hugged her sister while Danny wiped his own eyes and pretended he had something stuck in them. They sat down together at the small kitchen table. The same table where they had shared countless Friday night dinners over the past 2 years. But this time was different. This time, Kira was not just watching from the outside. This time, she was truly part of the meal. They talked and laughed and ate together. Danny and Mia with their regular pepperoni pizza and Kira with her special purple one. Sharing stories about their week and making plans for the weekend and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. "I want to make a toast," Kira said suddenly, raising her slice of pizza like a glass of champagne. Danny and Mia grinned and raised their own slices. "To family," Kira said, her voice steady and strong. "Not the family we are born into, but the family we choose and the family that chooses us. Thank you for choosing me." "To family," Danny and Mia echoed, and they all took bites of their pizza at the same time, somewhere across the galaxy. In the halls of the Galactic Collective's Central Council, diplomats and officials took note of what was happening on Earth. They had been watching humanity for years now, studying this strange species that had burst onto the galactic stage with such energy and enthusiasm, trying to understand what made them different from all the other civilizations the collective had encountered. And slowly, they were beginning to understand humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the smartest or the most technologically advanced. They had no special powers or abilities that set them apart from the dozens of other species that populated the stars, but they had something else. Something that the ancient and sophisticated civilizations of the collective had forgotten. Somewhere along their long road to the stars, they had heart. They had the capacity to look at a broken child that her own people had thrown away and see not a burden or a mistake, but a daughter worth fighting for. They had the ability to take strangers into their homes and turn them into family. Through nothing more than patience and kindness and love, they had the courage to stand up against impossible odds and say no when powerful forces tried to take what they had claimed as their own. The collective had conquered worlds and built empires and achieved technological wonders beyond human imagination, but they had never learned how to share a pizza, perhaps. The diplomats agreed in their private discussions. Humanity was exactly what the universe needed. Perhaps these strange little beings with their messy emotions and their stubborn compassion could teach the ancient civilizations of the galaxy something they had forgotten. Perhaps the future of the collective was not in more conquests or more technology or more power. Perhaps it was in a small kitchen on a Friday night, where a human janitor and his 2 daughters sat around a table and laughed together over pizza. Back in that kitchen, Danny looked at his girls and felt his heart overflow with a joy he had not known was possible. His wife was gone, and he still missed her every day. But he knew she would be proud of the family he had built in her absence, proud of the man he had become, proud of the daughters he was raising. "I love you both," he said quietly, "more than anything in this world or any other." Kira and Mia looked at each other and smiled. "We love you too, Dad," they said together, and outside the window, the stars shone bright in the October sky. Countless worlds and countless civilizations all turning slowly in the great dance of the cosmos. And somewhere out there, the story of Danny Carter and his alien daughter was being told and retold, inspiring others to open their hearts and their homes to those who needed them most. because that was what humans did. That was what family meant, and that was why humanity mattered. The end.